Hello everyone and welcome to Pirates of Darkwater for the Super Nintendo, a surprisingly fun beat-em-up based on, well, Pirates of Darkwater. We are playing as the character with the strongest heavy attack and the strongest, strength. Don't know his name, I assume it's pronounced Yaz, but I could be wrong about that. So the trade-off for Yaz's strength is that he's super slow. But I think that's a risk I'm willing to take, because hitting multiple enemies with this giant sword of his is just really satisfying. He can also do crazy shit like lift up enemies and carry them around and then slam them into the ground. The other two characters, when they grapple, they don't get to carry the enemy around, because they aren't nearly this awesome. Pirates of Darkwater is a beat-em-up with a lot of changes in elevation, and I think this works in the game's favor, especially when movement speed is such a huge factor. Like, you actively have to think about how you're approaching the enemies because you're not as fast as they are, at least not as Yaz. And if you're playing as one of the faster characters, then you're more vulnerable. But excuse me, where are my manners? I forgot to mention things about this game that are interesting for the time period. A lot of Super Nintendo games did not have a distinction between light and heavy attacks. This one does. The light attack is your punches, the heavy attack is whatever weapon you have on hand. That bird stole our watermelon. Now, the only problem with this is that the heavy attacks are the only thing you'll ever need to use. Even though Yaz's heavy attack is significantly slower than the other two characters, it's still definitely fast enough that light attacks are a waste of your time. I could be wrong, but I have played this game a significant amount and never found a reason to use them. Anyway, there are distinctions between the enemy types, and they have very descriptive names. Like the guy with the sickle is Sickle Man, and the guy that rides dragons, D-Rider. The big pirate's name is Big Pirate. They don't want to complicate things on ya. They also all have their own moves and nuances, but they may not be readily apparent. You'll find out as the game progresses, but maybe not right away. So the other thing that sets this game apart from beat-em-ups of the era is the abundance of hazards, and I mean there are a lot of them. Like, we had to stay on the left right there to avoid getting hit by all those boulders, but that's just one of the more simplistic hazards in the game. I would go so far as to say that the hazards are the main conductor of variety in the game. Anyway, this tiny guy right here, his name is Conk, and you might mistake him for a completely normal enemy, but he's not at all. Conk is actually a very serious boss battle, the first actually difficult boss in the game, but right here he's only a normal enemy. He can still seriously screw you up if you don't take him seriously, but we'll talk more about him when we see him later. I mean, especially since we already killed him like 10 seconds ago, would be kind of a waste to talk about him right now. Anyway, as I was saying, hazards are kind of the main conductor of variety in the game. There are only so many enemy types, but there are so many hazards. A countless amount, even. I mean, yeah, you've got your completely average hazards like pits to throw enemies down, which I will be doing all the time, by the way, because it's awesome. I love the way they bounce off the ground. It's just so satisfying. You can even knock them into the pits with your heavy attack. You want to try knocking them back with a normal attack? I guess you can do that, but there's no reason to. I love when you hit them into each other and then they fall down the cliff, even better. The hazards can seriously change the flow of a battle in your favor. Like, if you're getting your ass handed to you, look around for any hazards that are on the screen, because there's sure to be one or two. And then position yourself in a way that the enemies will get hit by those. Or better yet, position yourself in a way that you can knock the enemies into them. So you may have noticed, because I demonstrated it multiple times, that Yaz has no problem lifting up enemies of any size. The big pirates, the tall pirates, it doesn't matter. Also, for this hazard, we want to jump ahead in just the right way that we get knocked back onto the platform. Now, this may seem unfair, and indeed, if we were one of the faster characters, it wouldn't be so difficult. But there's an extra life right at the end of the hallway, so it doesn't really matter. Here's one of those changes in elevation I was talking about. And you really have to pay attention to these, because it can cause enemies to sneak up on you in ways that you might not expect. Like, for example, enemies obviously have a way easier time moving downstairs than they do moving up them. So you're going to want to pick either up or down. You don't want to stay in the middle of the steps, whatever you do. Going up these steps can make it harder for the enemies to reach you, but also gives you much less room to move around. So I prefer to stay down with Yaz, because he isn't all that fast. I say he's not all that fast, but as you're seeing here, even his slow heavy attack is plenty enough to take enemies out with the proper timing. It does require proper timing, though I must stress this. It did take a while for me to get the timing down. You kind of want the enemies to run into your sword. So when I said that Yaz had no trouble grappling enemies, that extends to everyone, even Bloth here, the boss. In spite of being the first boss, Bloth is no joke. He has a lot of attacks that deal immense amount of damage to us, and we could die in a couple of seconds if we're not careful. The trick is to stay above or below him at all times because all of his attacks are horizontally focused. He will never attack directly above or below himself. That is his weakness. That's also why he seems so unsure of what to do when we're above or below him. He just doesn't know how to approach us. His poor AI can't fathom it. So not a bad first stage at all for a Super Nintendo beat 'em up. I think it's actually fairly impressive, leaves a great first impression for the rest of the game, and it introduces you to everything you should like about it. There are a ton of ways you could rationalize Cyclopsis not being in the game, but I don't want to hear them. So anyway, this is the last of the new enemy type for a while, and yeah, it's beneficial to always make her use the short range attack if you can, because you can strike her immediately after with minimal hassle. Anyway, with that incredible slog out of the way, it's now time for one of the interesting sections of this world. And it also contains my favorite music again, so that's good. So welcome to the whatever you want to call this part of the level. I don't know what's propelling our board right now, but it must be something really strong because we're creating a hell of a wake. Anyway, I actually definitely approve of this section, or at least its ideas. For the most part, we can move exactly the same way that we could in the rest of the game, but our dodge roll is missing. This may not seem like a big deal, and that's because it isn't, but it's a slight difference. Other slight differences include the abundance of rocks and the abundance of flying enemies. These aren't remarkable or anything, but they are a break in pacing, which is appreciated. I think you'd be relatively hard-pressed to die, even if you did hit all of these rocks and didn't really care about evading the enemies at this point. But hell, I mean, at least they're dropping a lot of experience orbs, right? And we can turn on superpower mode at any time to make this even easier, but the enemy waves are so separate from each other during this section that I don't really think it's worth it. Maybe I'm being too harsh on the game, though. I mean, it does have some restraint. Like, why would the game do something like put a giant wall of green health pickups in your paths? The game is really, really easy, and if anything, the health pickups should be removed entirely, so it's a good thing that the game would never do something like that. I mean, could you imagine if we just waded through an entire glob of green health pickups in this game of all games? That would make me lose any faith that the developers understood anything about game design. So normally I just do the first level or so, but I think it's only fair to do 2 this time around because this game does a lot right, and I think it should be, if not celebrated, then at least recognized for getting so much right. This seems like a decent enough time to talk about the enemy types. Dragon Rider and Sickle Man can knock you out of the air if you try doing air attacks with their sickles and knives respectively. And Tattoo Man here, the appropriately named Tattoo Man, he can block your attacks with ease, so usually it's a good idea just to pick him up and smash him down, which is what we do most of the time anyway. You may be noticing that the enemies seem like cannon fodder, like we're just absolutely plowing through them, and I don't think that's unintentional. Combat against normal enemies is almost always guaranteed to be easy in this game, which is why I think they have so many hazards and gussied up the level design so much. Because this game does place a greater emphasis on level design than enemy design, and I think it really shows. Like right here. It may not seem like a lot, but it makes you think about where you place your footing more than a lot of beat-em-ups of this era. Like, for example, we don't want to stand at the very top where we'll be cornered, and we can only move left to right while enemies rush in from both sides. Staying at the bottom was a much better idea where we have more room to move. Oh hey, it's the tall pirate. We saw him very briefly in the last level. His thing is that he has enhanced range, because he's tall. His range is good enough that he can hit us without walking into the spikes, but I wanted to make him walk into the spikes anyway. Speaking of the spikes, we're going to be using those to our advantage during this entire fight by standing directly between the spikes and this pillar over to our right. Any enemies that come in from the left will run through the spikes, and any enemies that come in from the right will have to go around the pillar. So we're protected from both directions and have plenty of time to react to any enemies that come our way. And I don't think this is unintentional either. I'm fairly certain the level design is the way it is for a very good reason. That reason being what you're seeing right here, to outsmart the enemies and use the hazards to our advantage. The spikes deal decent enough damage by themselves too. It may take a while for them to kill enemies, but it will happen. The only thing we really have to worry about is the tall pirate, because he can still reach over those spikes. The tattoo pirate also has a mean drop kick, but for the most part that was a much better strategy than just attacking them head on, and much more entertaining. So it might be more beneficial to stand at the top this time because there's more room, but I tend to stand near the bottom anyway because that's how we can throw enemies down the pit. Of course we can easily be knocked into the pit ourselves and lose an entire life, so it's probably not the best strategy, but I live dangerously. You may have also noticed that the placement of enemy types is not particularly smart in this game. But as has already been said twice at least, I don't think the enemy placement or enemy designs were the focus. This next section is categorized only by the fact that there are a ton of boulders falling down everywhere, and I've yet to find a consistent way to evade all of them. Maybe just staying in the bottom left corner would have worked out, I can't be too sure. Anyway, they don't deal that much damage, so I wouldn't worry about it. And immediately after that, oh hey, a fire! This fire serves the same practical function as the spikes, but unlike the spikes, there is no pillar. Instead of a pillar, there's just the edge of the screen. And we're going to stay on the side of the screen with more space, so that way we don't run into the fire, but also because a lot of the enemies come from the right. And all of those enemies coming from the right just smash their faces into the fire like a bunch of doofuses. Solves a lot of our problems for us. Some of them do manage to make it around, but I'm pretty sure that's by accident. Before we know it, the part with the fire is over, and ahead is a situation with some trickier placement. So it would appear that we can't stand in the center of the screen at all, and we need to pick a side. We're going to pick the left side. Now we could of course stand above or below the fire in the center instead of to the left or right of it, but the enemies won't run into the fire that way, and why wouldn't we want the enemies to run into the fire? No matter which side you pick, it's guaranteed that a lot of the enemies will just smash their faces into it. I prefer the left side for no real reason, but you can throw enemies to the right side or left side if you don't like them anywhere near you. There's one more bit of hazard placement in this level that I really like, so let's take a look at that. So, with this one, we have fire and spikes to contend with. Again, they're both basically the same thing, but with both of them on screen in such a weird position, we have two choices. We can go to the right, or we can stay on the left. The right seems to have more space, especially with the absence of a pillar. But on the left, we can get enemies to run into both the fire and the spikes. I'm going to stay on the left, because like I said, I like to live dangerously. These hazards aren't too much a danger to us, even if we do get hit by them. The danger really is not having enough space to move around. But I find that we can circumvent that easily enough just by throwing everyone's bodies everywhere. So yeah, this is basically the level design of the game. There are a lot of changes in elevation, and there are a lot of hazards, sometimes to varying degrees. Like this level barely had any elevation at all. Some will have a lot more, some will have a lot less, some will also have a lot less hazards, but this and the first level show off what I like about the design pretty thoroughly, so if you want a fun beat 'em up with decent level design that's a bit on the easy side aside from the boss battles, then this is for you. Just keep in mind it's kinda lengthy. I mean, I don't think it ever gets dreadfully boring or anything, but you might want to take a break now and then, because there are like 9 levels. Right, so after that we move straight to the boss battle against Conk. I did warn you he was a pretty serious and formidable boss battle. And there are a couple things that make him formidable. First is that ranged attack you just saw. Another one is that we can't really grab him consistently. If we try to grab him, there's a high chance that instead he will leap on us and start doing damage to us instead of what we wanted. Now there are 2 surefire ways to damage him. One of those is to hit him with our sword, and the other one is to hit him with the bodies of others. Hitting him with the bodies of others is a bit safer, but you're going to want to get that sword timing down anyway, because eventually there will stop being people to hit him with. He also zips around quite a bit, and while he can't attack directly above or below him, when you're as agile as he is, that doesn't really matter. He can go from 0 to on your ass in a matter of seconds, or matter of a second, rather. He also has a really big health bar, so your chances of winning a minimal effort war of attrition are pretty much none. The other reason we keep throwing people's bodies into him is because these people are an immense distraction. They make it way easier for Conk to hit us, and I don't like that. After we get them out of the way, though, we'll get to my favorite part of the boss fight, because it's all about foot placement and timing. And I think we're nearly there. Nearly. Just a few more bad guys, I'm sure. This guy must be the last one. Yeah, there we go. Now, with no one else to throw into Conk, we have to hit him with our sword. And we do this by standing diagonally away from him. When he's only moving horizontally, he can charge straight into you with a headbutt, but diagonally, you can make him walk into your sword, which is a lot safer. Unbelievably boring boss fight. I almost fell asleep, literally fell asleep while playing this boss fight multiple times. I mean, yeah, you see me dodging the enemy attacks on screen right here, but there's no reason to do that. I'm pretty sure I could leave my guy standing for 3 minutes and he still wouldn't die. And it's not like they didn't almost have a good idea here. This thing has enough attacks that it could be another Turban Shell, if only they made the fight go faster. Because the challenge certainly isn't what this fight's about. The challenge is non-existent. Switching between two forms is actually a really cool idea if they would have done it faster, but as it is, it only serves to make the fight longer, and it's a really long and boring fight as it is. I just can't understand why, with everything else this boss fight doesn't have going for it, they would also decide to make the attacks deal so little damage. There's no reason to do it. Feels like your time isn't being appreciated. Games like Dynasty Warriors aren't meant to be challenging or anything, but they're at least satisfying to play. You have to have one of the two. If you're a traditional kind of game, you have to have one of those two. Why is this boss fight neither? Why?